how much wealth would be produced in Australia during the months of April and May if all the people who depend for their living on wages stopped going to work? That's right, none. There would be zero. So stick a pin there. That's one thing you gotta keep in mind, because as in the law where possession is 9/10 of it, in politics, possession of wealth is 9/10 of politics. And the possession of wealth is what we're talking about when we're talking about the taxation system, the system which transfers the wealth that's being produced by you to the state, so that various and sundry things that the state needs to do are done. The things that are really important to us, the things that are being cut by the LNP government, like the public health, education, and welfare, what other people call the social wage, which supplements our wage. Those things are being cut because of insufficient revenue going into the government. But why is that happening? Why is that happening? Is it because the government is spending too much money on health, education, and welfare? Well, if you believe the conservatives, that's what's happened. And that's why they're saying that we need to cut these things. But actually, if you look at the statistics that come out of the Australian Bureau of Statistics, the real GDP, which is another measure of wealth, that real GDP has grown on average from 2 to 3% every year. That means that we, the working class, the 90%, are becoming ever more productive of wealth, right? But where is it going? Well, if you look at the annual report put out by this gigantic Swiss bank called Credit Suisse, they put it out every year. You can Google it if you want. And you go through all the statistics and charts and so forth and so on. You basically come to the conclusion that the top 10% of the world's population accumulate 80% of the wealth that the bottom 90% are producing. Okay, and that varies from nation to nation, and in Australia, this radical pattern is somewhat assuaged by our access to the social wage. That is, public health, education, and welfare, the things that the LNP want to cut because they say that the Labour Party has spent too much on it. But the contradiction is the more wealth we produce, the less we seem to be able to afford. And the reason why that is because the way the tax system has been jiggled around since the time of Gough Whitlam to transfer more and more of the wealth up to the big end of town and away from government public services and away from your standard of living. This is, if you look back on the history of a little bit of this taxation game, you find that the company tax back in 1986 was set at 49%, and then Hawke, because he fell for the trickle-down theory of economics, some people call it neoliberalism, he cut it down to 39%, and then Howard, of course, who is a dyed-in-the-wool conservative, he cut it down to 30%, and then now Tony Abbott wants to cut it down to 28.5%. In fact, that's already been legislated and will go through in July. So there's one source, there's a hole that has happened in terms of the amount of wealth that we're producing and the amount of wealth going into the government to fund public education, health, and welfare. Now, another thing that happened under the Howard era in 2005, Howard and the conservatives in general hate progressive taxation, and the progressive tax in Australia is the income tax. The income tax, which it's set so that it's progressive because if the more wealth you have associated with your income, the more a percentage of your tax goes up. So, for instance, the first $18,000 of income is not taxed at all. So if you're making less than $18,000 a year, you don't pay tax. But if you're making $180,000 or more, you're taxed every dollar above the $180,000, 42%. No, 45%. That income tax was cut in 2005, and it led to $169 billion being blown out of the budget, dropped right out of the budget from 2005 to 2012, and in 2013 alone, the budget lost $40,000 because $40 billion because of that cut. And the deficit in 2013 was 38 billion. So you can see right there, if they had just rescinded the 2005 income tax cut, then the majority of which benefit went to, of course, to the upper 10%. They got more than the bottom 80%. If they just rescinded that, there would have been a budget surplus. And there would be a budget surplus if they rejigged the company tax back to where it was in 1986 at 49%. There would be a budget surplus if they stopped giving the mining capitalists $4.5 billion in tax concessions every year. Okay, there would be a budget surplus if they looked at the capital gains tax and raised that. But no, they're not talking about that in their mature discussion about tax. What they're going to talk about is raising the taxes on the bottom 90%, and the way they do that is through regressive taxation, and the way that's done is by raising the fuel excise, which they've already done. They'll probably raise the sin taxes, which are also regressive on tobacco and alcohol, and they'll also talk about, oh, well, we need to raise the GST and widen it. And they'll raise, and you remember the GST, the one Howard said was never going to be enacted under his government, and then he enacted it with the help of the Democrats. Okay, well, he wants to, they're going to talk about raising it to 12.5% from what it's been, 10% added to everything, every good and service that you ever bought since the time it was enacted. And then not only raising it to 12.5% or even 15%, some of them are saying, but to widen it to include fresh food. Now, just think about this. If they raise it to 12.5% on fresh food alone, they'll raise $6 billion for the government. Okay, well, that is the same amount that they cut from government funding when they axed the so-called carbon tax, the price on the biggest polluters. Okay, so this is the direction that the LNP are going, and this is what they mean when they're saying that they want to have a rational discussion about, a mature discussion about tax. What they mean is they want you to have a lower standard of living. Now, they're sending a price signal to you via the GP tax that they're proposing. I propose that we send a price signal to them that if they dare enact a higher GST or a GP tax or any of their other regressive taxation, that what we're going to do is we're going to send a price signal to them that if they do it, they're out of government and that's it. We're going to elect another government, not an LNP government, and I think they'll start to listen if we start saying that. Don't listen to the pundits who say that's the only rational thing to do is to raise the GST. Counter-propose a tax on the companies back to 1986. Or any of a number of other ways of taxing the wealth that's ever accumulating, as the statistics show that the real GDP is growing on an average of 2 to 3% a year, and most of it's ending up in the big end of town. Propose that they tax them. Okay? Thank you very much.